how to plan a watercolor painting. That's what we're looking at in this video. Welcome back to my channel. If we have not met before, my name is Michelle, and on this channel you'll find all things watercolor and a little bit of mixed media too. Please do consider subscribing. If you click the bell icon, you can get notified every time I have a video for you. I make one free video a week here on YouTube on a Thursday, with extra content on Saturdays for my Patreon subscribers. So you know what they say, fail to plan, plan to fail. Well, it's true of watercolor painting, isn't it? Because watercolors are not as adjustable as other mediums such as oils and acrylics. And so if you don't plan them from the start, then it really can be quite disastrous. Now, if you're a beginner, it might sound daunting to plan your painting, but really it's just a matter of taking a few very simple things into consideration. And I'm going to go through some of those today. So if you don't plan your painting, you can end up getting into a lot of trouble and making a big mess and making very simple mistakes that could have been avoided by just doing a little bit of simple, thought processes and planning at the very beginning. Now, the opposite can also happen, can't it? So you can accidentally do a really good painting and then think, oh, I was just, doing it basically on the back of an envelope or a scrappy old piece of printer paper. And so that is also another version of failing to plan. And I think at the heart of all of this, it's a lack of patience. We just want to get on with the painting. We don't want to sort of, take time and think about stuff. If we haven't got the right stuff to hand, we're just going to get on with it anyway. So I hope that at the end of this video, you'll have a lot clearer idea of how to plan a watercolor painting and the things that you should be doing so that you can have a lot more chance of success. I once read an interview with an artist who'd won a very prestigious art prize, and they said to him, well, how did he achieve this? And he said that he always has a high expectation for his work. In other words, he always gives his work the best chance of succeeding from the beginning. And I think that's something that we can all do, whatever level we're starting from, is to give our work the best chance right from the beginning, and that starts with the planning. So the first thing I have for you to consider, and this is before you even look for your art materials, this is, you could still be sat in the armchair thinking about doing your painting. I want you to think about what is the purpose of your painting. Now, that may be a strange question, especially if you're a beginner, but there are lots of options, aren't there, when we start a painting? Do you just want to have fun? Is it just for relaxation? If it is, then you're going to find that you're going to be a lot more relaxed and have a lot more fun if you're getting a good result from your painting. After all, when you mess things up, it's a bit stressful, isn't it? It's that, you might set out to be relaxed, but it can end up being, very far from relaxation. So some of the other things I'm going to tell you about in this video will help you to get that good result from the beginning. Now, there are other options for your painting. Are you looking to learn a specific thing? Have you, for instance, messed up the sky in your last painting? And so the purpose of this next painting is to improve the sky. Now, if you just start from exactly the same, position that you started the previous painting in, you've got no more chance of success than you had before. So this is a time to really analyse what went wrong with the previous painting and really consider, was it the quality of the paint? Was it that you used granulating pigments? You don't like how they looked in the sky? Did you get the colour wrong? Did you overwork it? Were there drying lines? If there are drying lines, what can you do next time that might be a little bit different? Perhaps a bit of preparation, maybe watch a YouTube video. I have a video on painting skies if you would like to look at that one. It's all about preparation and thinking about getting the best results. So if you are looking for your next painting to be a learning experience, it's really, really important that you think about it mindfully and you don't just do another painting hoping for a better result than before. I mean, I think that was Einstein that said, the definition of madness is doing exactly the same thing and hoping for a different result. Now, I made a video all about how to improve your painting. And this is a video that's all about using a method of learning that will help you to really analyse where you're going wrong and to really move forward. So I will link to that one. Some devices will be on the information cards up above. If it's not there, do have a look in the video description because I'll drop it in there as well. And that's all about using something called deliberate practice. And this is sort of it's purposeful practice. It's not just practice for practice sake that may not move you forward. So think about what your painting is for, and is it for learning? In which case, be specific. Try to just focus on one thing rather than just kind of, well, I just hope it's a little bit better than the last one. Think about the thing that you would most like to improve. What most didn't you like about the previous painting, and what would you like to really, really do better at with this painting? And by having that in mind right from the beginning, then you have a better chance of success. Now, it may be that your painting is meant to be a gift. In which case, do you know enough about the person you're giving it to? Do you know enough what they really, really want? Or are you just starting something with the hope that they might like it? So this might be the time to do a little bit of research and find out exactly what they want, exactly where they might put this piece of art, so that they really, really enjoy the gift. Another thing, another reason you might be starting a painting is you might be doing a commission for someone. And believe me, people who have even just started painting get commissions sometimes. So there are huge amounts of mistakes you can make with commissions. Basically, if you are doing a commission, you need to have sort of micro planning in place. You need to absolutely understand everything about what the person wants. Now, if you're in my Patreon group, I did do a video about 10 mistakes people make when accepting commissions. If you've been in any of the Facebook art groups, you will have seen people get into trouble with commissions time and time again. So that's a whole other subject. But just consider that if you are doing a commission, you absolutely have to know exactly what is required. So the first thing that you need to plan for your painting is what is the purpose of your painting. So my next tip for planning your paintings is to prepare your paper properly. Now, I'm a big fan of paper stretching. I've had other rants on this channel about stretching your paper. I have no intention of making you listen to it again. But it doesn't even have to be paper stretching. You know, maybe you tape your paper down with a certain type of tape. Whatever you do to prepare your paper, or perhaps you like to work on a certain type of block or on a certain board. Now, it may be that you like working on a certain board and actually you can't work on that board because it's being used somewhere else, so you're not going to bother taping your paper down, and that's where it all starts to go wrong. So it's a really simple tip, this one, but whatever you do to prepare your paper and to get the right paper, make sure that you do that before you start your painting. Now, my next tip follows directly on from the last one, and that's to make sure that you have all the equipment you need. Now, it sounds simple, doesn't it? But perhaps there's an ideal colour for the sky of your painting and you have run out of that shade of blue. Well, do you want to wait 2 days for it to arrive from Amazon, or, you know, several weeks, depending where you live in the world? Maybe you'll just get on and start the painting anyway. I do advise you, if you have a particular paint colour or a particular tool, a particular brush, or something that you need to use for your painting, make sure that you know where everything is. It's easy to lose a brush. If you might have been attending an art class and you've lost a brush, you don't even know it's gone until you start the painting. And then thereafter you're making bad decisions. So you're thinking to yourself, well, I really need that big flat brush. I haven't got it. I'll try this smaller one. And, you know, it can all go wrong. The same with paints. If you have a specific idea for colours that you want in your painting, then, you know, make sure you've got those paints available. If that means waiting 3 weeks for them to arrive in the post, then go and do a different painting instead. So don't compromise on equipment, and do make sure, even if you think, you know where this stuff is and you think that you own this stuff, do make sure that you know where it is to start with, because we all know how brushes disappear and how stuff goes missing. I mean, especially for me, because I'm teaching classes and people wander off with things and I end up with things that I don't know where they've come from. That may not happen to you, but if you do go out and attend classes, or perhaps you paint outdoors, even in the garden. I mean, the other day I actually just found that I didn't have an eraser. I mean, I've got a studio full of art equipment and I had no eraser. And I really didn't want to start my painting without it. I know I've got some cheap ones that just don't work as well. They smudge all the pencil. It's so hard, isn't it, to have that patience to wait until you've got the right equipment. But do just double check you have everything you need before you start. So this next one I have seen my students get into trouble with probably more than anything else. And that is, doing a hasty drawing or a bad drawing and then expecting that when they put the paint on it, it will improve. If you have been painting for any time whatsoever, you will have noticed that bad drawings are not improved by putting paint on. All it does is accent the mistakes. So I want you to consider, if you are happy with your drawing, if you've done a drawing and you're not quite happy with it, you think, I'll just put the paint on it, perhaps it'll work out okay. Just stop. Even if it means getting another piece of paper or spending another 3 hours drawing, it's far, far better to do that than to go ahead and start the painting and everything to be wrong. Now, another thing to consider is composition, and this is a problem that will hit you as you get a little bit better at painting. So when I started painting, I've always been quite good at painting and drawing, so I improved quite rapidly, and there were lots of areas that I was good at. So I was good at colour mixing. I've always had this instinctive thing for colour. I was pretty good at drawing, and I was quite good at applying the paint. So why did I end up sometimes with paintings that just didn't look any good? And the answer was composition. Now, composition for me, it was my bugbear. It was the hardest thing for me to learn. And it doesn't matter how good your drawing is or how well you apply the paint or how much you know about mixing colours. If your composition is wrong, your painting's always going to look a bit weird and it's just not going to work out. So do take time. You don't have to learn, huge amounts of technical things about composition. Now, I do have, for those of you who have joined or want to join my Patreon, when you join my Patreon, you get a free download, which is my 10 best tips for composition. But if you don't want to do that, it's fine too. But do just spend a little bit of time looking at your picture and just seeing if it looks balanced, if things are okay. It's a good idea not to have your composition, with the centre of interest slap bang in the middle. And it's a good idea to just consider how things are going off the edges. If you've got a still life, for instance, you don't want it stuck to one edge. Something that happens quite often when people have a difficulty scaling their drawings is that things end up a different size to how they were expecting. And so it's quite common for your still life object, for example, to be off centre or even touching one edge, which can be a bit of a disastrous composition mistake. So all I'm saying with this one is make sure that you are reasonably happy with your drawing, and it doesn't even have to be a lot of drawing. The amount of drawing you do will be entirely dependent on the subject. If you're doing, complex buildings, you'll need a lot of drawing. If you're doing a simple landscape, it may just be as simple as doing a horizon line and perhaps the slope of the river. That could be all you need. But if you don't get it right at that stage, trust me, it is never going to improve when you put paint on it. So have the patience to start again with your drawing if you need to. If you're enjoying this video and getting some value from it, can I ask you for a quick favour? Could you please click the like button? YouTube rewards audience interaction, and if you click like, share, subscribe, or even leave me a comment, it will help my channel to grow, and I'll be super grateful. So the next tip I have for you relates entirely to drawing, and that is before you start, make sure that you clean up your drawing and remove any smudges, any general, if you've got graphite and it's generally smudged right across your paper, do clean that up as well. And if you've got any construction lines, sort of if you've done a straight line going through the middle of someone or sort of through their head or something like this, or if you've drawn a window 3 times in a building, make sure that you clean up as much of the pencil as you can at the beginning. It may even be the case that you've gone a little bit heavier with the pencil lines just because you needed to be able to see where they were, and now you can afford to perhaps lift some of that pencil out and just take an eraser across the top and just get rid of some of that pencil line, because once you start to put watercolour paint on, you trap the pencil in. And although some of it sometimes will lift out at the end of the painting when things are dry, that really depends on what sort of pigments you've used. If you're using sort of semi-opaques and cadmiums, particularly yellows, they really can block things in. So the best thing to do is get as much of that pencil out before you start the painting. And even as you go through the stages of the painting, I like to remove pencil as I go. If you paint up to a pencil line and then you're going to paint to the other edge of the pencil line, why not, once you've painted up to it from one side and you no longer need it, let your work dry and then remove that pencil line before you paint up to it to the other side and block it in. So remove as much pencil and all construction lines as you can before you start painting. Now the next thing that it's important to plan with your watercolour painting is reserving your whites. So you need to look at your source material, at your photograph or your still life or your view, and decide if there are any pure whites in there, and if there are, how you are going to reserve them. Now it's not always masking fluid. It may be a case that you just need to know where they are so that you can paint around them. If they're quite large areas, that's something you can do. But it really is a thought process that you need to go through, and you need to consider how you're going to keep these light areas, these whites, white as you go through the painting, and how you're going to avoid accidentally painting over them, because it's hard to get them back to pure white. It may be that you need to apply some masking fluid. Now, people do get into trouble with masking fluid, so if you're very new to masking fluid and you haven't used it before, do watch my video. I'll link to it in the information cards up above and in the description about the mistakes that people make with masking fluid. It is not the answer to all your problems. Now, it may also be that you need to reserve some whites and that masking fluid is too harsh and too hard-edged. It is not suitable, regardless of what people might tell you or what you might have seen done. It is not suitable for all types of paper reserving. There are many other ways that you can reserve white paper. As I said, the simplest is just to paint round white areas, but if you need something else, I have done a video for you about alternatives to masking fluid. So if you think that the areas you need to reserve are perhaps a bit too big or not hard edged enough for masking fluid, then I have done a video of masking fluid alternatives. Again, I'll link to that above and in the information cards. So the next step for you is to look at your subject and decide if there are any white areas, and consider how you are going to reserve those areas so that you don't paint over them. So another thing I want you to consider at the start of a painting, and this is a really important one, and again I see lots of people get into trouble with this, and this is backgrounds. So maybe you're doing something like a flower or an animal. I see it so many times, in my Facebook group, in other people's Facebook groups. I see people come on and they're sort of, well, I've painted this, shall I put a background in? And I have to say, a disclaimer here, it's do as I say, not do as I do, because I did go into my own Facebook group the other day and I'd done a botanical painting of hollyhocks, and I was kind of like, I'd planned them to be on white paper, and I said I had this sudden idea that I might put yellow behind them, and I sort of went into my Facebook group and I said, talk me out of it. They all talked me into it actually, and I threw the yellow in. But there's a difference between somebody who's been painting for 20 years doing that and a beginner doing that. And it can be a thing that can get you into an awful lot of trouble. So I'm not saying that you should never ever change your mind halfway through a painting. I'm saying you should think very carefully about it, and that putting in a background halfway through nearly always is a bad idea. But I want you to, and you don't have to put the background in at the beginning, but I'm saying that maybe the background is planned at the beginning. So I want you to think very, very carefully from the beginning and try to have a plan about whether or not your painting is going to have a background. And don't just start considering this halfway through when you think perhaps it needs something. Now, I did do a video all about vignette background, so if you fancy just having a background that's sort of there and not there, in other words that fades out towards the edges, they can be a really good solution as well. So I'll link to that one up above and in the video description too. And you might want to put a vignette background in, so that's a background that doesn't cover the whole background but just fades out. Perhaps you want a wet into wet background, perhaps you want a more precise background. So it's not an exact rule that you can't change your mind halfway through the painting, and if you really feel convinced of it, do ask some other people's opinions and do consider it carefully. It's fine to put a background in halfway through, but I'm just saying that it's really something that you must start considering from the beginning of your painting and not just let it sneak up on you, because I've seen people get into trouble so many times when they sort of carelessly halfway through a painting just decide to shove a background in. It may actually be not the correct time to put the background in. Backgrounds can quite often, especially with small items like still lifes and flowers and things like that, it can quite often be advantageous to put the background in first. There's no exact rule. You have to judge it on the painting techniques that you're going to use and the colours that you're using within your painting. So no exact rule, but do stop and think before you start your painting. Do you want a background? If you do, what's it going to look like? What techniques are you going to use? And should you be putting that in first, or will it go in later on? So the next tip I have for you is something that you already know, but do you do it? This is to work from light to dark. So it's really important that you quite religiously work from light to dark. Now, if you're doing a landscape, it's nearly always a good idea to put the sky in first, and also any water. You should probably start doing those first, but beyond that, you want to be looking at working light to dark within every painting. And it can be tricky, because what happens is when there are bright colours, when there are strong colours, it's much easier to mix those colours. It's much easier to know what they are. If, for example, you had a concrete path and some bright red lilies. Now, you're looking at that concrete path and it's kind of grey, it's kind of beige, and greige, is that a thing? I think that's a thing, isn't it? And you don't quite know how to mix this colour. It's difficult. But what about those bright red flowers? Oh, well, that's easy. You've got that colour in your box. You can slap that in straight away. So easy, isn't it, to just, you know that you should work light to dark with watercolour, but then you're going to just, go straight in with those strong colours, because it's much easier to mix them. It's much easier to know how they look and, what they're going to turn out like, than it is to start with those light, weirdly sort of odd, neutral colours that you might be, it might be more important that you start with. Now, I want you to be especially careful with reds and with purples, because they tend to bleed. Now, there are occasions when you might need to put them in at the beginning if you're doing maybe a botanical flower painting, but generally speaking, anything with red in, you want to leave it as late on as possible in your painting. And the same goes for very strong, very dark blues, very dark purples, because as you paint up to the edge of those, they have a tendency to bleed out. So do remember to work light to dark, and don't sort of, just give yourself a cop out because you don't know how to mix those light colours and go straight in with the darks. It will always lead to pain further down, and sooner or later you're going to have to mix that light colour. So why not take the time and mix it at the beginning of your painting and work light to dark so that you don't get in too much trouble later on. The next tip I have for you is to swatch your colours and plan your colours before starting. Now, it's not always possible to plan every single tube of paint or every single pan of paint that you might be using as you go through the painting, but it's a good idea to have an initial look at your colours, and especially if you have something like greens in your painting. So many times I see people sort of, take a colour, especially if they've got pan paints, because it's very, very easy with pan paints just to be dipping into every single colour and sort of randomly chucking them on your paper. Now, to start with, what will happen is you'll end up with the wrong colours, but the other thing that can happen is the painting doesn't hang together very well. So you want to be looking to use a limited palette. Now, this doesn't mean, for some people, a limited palette is the fact that they don't own many colours. They do all their paintings, perhaps, your oil painters do this, do all their paintings with 8 colours. That's not what I mean. What I mean is using a limited palette within a painting. So it doesn't matter if you own, like me, over 100 colours, you're not going to chuck them all into one painting because you don't get that sort of that look and that cohesiveness, and it doesn't hang together nicely. So at the beginning, consider which colours you're going to use. What blue are you going to use for the sky? Are you going to use cobalt blue? Well, let's try it out on a piece of paper and see if that actually looks nice. Let's let it dry. Let's see how much water it needs. Let's sort of hold it up to the sky or up to the photograph that you're using. And do you actually like the cobalt blue? And maybe it's not so good. Perhaps you would rather use cerulean. Maybe you're going to try that out and swatch that as well. Maybe that's too light. Well, what about mixing them together? Perhaps we mix the cobalt and the cerulean. Well, now we've got a blue. It's really nice and it looks like the sky we're painting. So you see this whole thought process around using colours, and particularly with greens. I see so many harsh, unnatural greens. I've done other videos on mixing greens if you want to have a look at those. But it's more a case of don't just chuck the paint on your paper without considering the colour first, and always swatch your colours. I mean, because I stretch my paper, I've always got sort of scraps of paper that are cut off from the edge of a sheet. And you always want to, even if that's not something that you do, keep yourself perhaps a small pad of some cheaper watercolour paper just to try your colours out. Or I know some people, when they're painting, they just leave a border down the side and try their colours out there. Don't get to the point where you're just chucking colours on the paper and hoping for the best. I've seen it so many times walking around art classes, and somebody's just said, well, it's not the right colour. I thought it might be all right. And I just think, well, why didn't you try it out before you put it on? So this is something, it's a tip that requires no artistic skill whatsoever, but it really will improve your paintings if you just take the time to plan the colours that you're using from the beginning and to try out the colours on a piece of paper. Watercolour can dry up to 50% lighter, so it's really important that you try these colours out and see how they dry and see if they're suitable. As I said, you may not be able to plan every colour that you're going to use in a painting right from the beginning, but at least the ones that you're going to start with initially, start by writing those colours down and work within that limited palette. So if you have used a couple of blues in the sky and then you need some greens for the grass, maybe you could mix those with a yellow and from the blues that you've already used. So only introducing new colours when you have to, and also just having that idea of planning your colours from the start. It will save you so many heartaches. Don't ever be just chucking a colour or a technique straight on your paper without trying it out first. So this next tip is for those of you that work from photographs, and that's to work from a decent photograph. I can't tell you how many people I've seen about to start a commission painting someone's dog, and they've got this little, 2-inch high pixelated picture in black and white of Fido, and they're trying to, capture the full glory of him. Whenever you get asked to paint a dog, they generally tend to have passed. They tend to be dead dogs. And, you're not going to get anywhere if you've only got a tiny photograph. If you are lucky and the dog is still alive, perhaps take some photographs of your own. I was commissioned to do a painting of Lavenham High Street a few years back, which is a beautiful medieval village here in Suffolk in England. And the photograph I was given, I just wasn't happy with. And I actually drove over to the village 3 or 4 times until I got the right levels of light, until it stopped raining, and standing in the middle of the road, sort of dodging the traffic, taking a photograph until I got something that I could work with. Now, even if you're not using a commission, often I've seen people come along to my art classes, and I do provide photographs and still life objects, but they also sometimes bring their own, which is lovely. If you've got your own photograph, you can bring it to an art class. But rather than print it out onto a large piece of paper, what they've done is they've got it on their phone, and they're trying to work with it on their phone in the 15 seconds they get before the screensaver kicks in again and the phone goes black. And they've got this tiny little image and the light's reflecting off it, and it's just it's just disastrous. So if you are working from a photograph, make sure that it's a good photograph. You can't paint what you can't see, you absolutely can't. I would advise you as well, unless you're doing a study of an old master's painting to improve your own paintings and to see how things worked, I would advise you as well not to work from a photograph of someone else's artwork. So I've seen this, people see a nice image of perhaps a watercolour painting on a calendar and they come into class and they're, well, I'm going to paint this, isn't it lovely? But the problem is that when the artist painted that picture, they had either the scene in front of them or they had a clear photograph, and they made all sorts of decisions about what they were going to include in the painting and what they were going to exclude, and how they were going to make it look, and which colours they were going to adjust and how they were going to change it. Now, if you're working from that artist's work, you're on second hand already. You don't have the option of choosing what to leave out and what to leave in, because the artist whose work it is has already made those decisions for you. So I do advise you to work, if you're working from photographs, to work from a really clear photograph. Consider as well copyright. Don't just take something off the internet and not worry about whether it's copyright free. As I said at the beginning, you may not care, because you think, well, I'm not going to sell it, it's just a study piece. And what happens if you do a really, really wonderful painting, and then I've done this myself when I first started painting. I've done a really fantastic painting and I thought, oh, I can't sell it because it's someone else's copyright in the photograph. So before you start, this is something else you need to plan, is make sure that you have a good, clear, large photograph to work from. If you're printing it out, you want it to be at least A4 in size, and if you're American, you're thinking, what on earth is that? It's basically standard letter size. That's really as small as you should be going with photographs. You're not going to give yourself the best chance of success if you're working from some tiny, blurred, pixelated photograph, or if you're trying to work from a device like your phone. There's all sorts of light reflections that go on with those, and they almost all have screensavers, so you're going to be constantly having the phone switch itself off. I mean, I don't know how people have got the patience for it. So if you're going to do that at an art class, print a large photograph off to take with you before you go. And when you're working at home, do make sure that you have a really, really lovely, clear photograph and that you can see everything you need to see. You can't work from poor materials. You can't work from a place of not having all the information you need. You're not, as we said at the beginning of the video, giving yourself the best chance of success. Do let me know in the comments which one of these tips you like the best, and if you're going to incorporate any of these when you next plan a watercolour painting. I would like to say a special thank you at this point to my Patreon subscribers. You help me to make these free YouTube videos possible. And if any of you watching would like to get an insight into how I plan my own paintings and just see work completed in much more depth than I am able to do here on YouTube, do pop over to Patreon. The link is in the description. Now, if you've enjoyed this video and found it useful, you're going to like my easy watercolour flower painting for beginners. You can watch that video right now.